is Dr. Stan back here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay and bringing you the news, behind the news, the story behind the story. Hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at, illusion is usually king. But in the battle for survival of Western civilization, it's going to be reality and not illusion or delusion that's going to determine what the future will bring. And I need to remind you the views that are expressed here are not those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of this station. They happen to be my views, the views of our guests, the views of our callers. And of course, I certainly welcome your calls from out across America at 1-888-24-LIBERTY, and here on the Central Coast of California at 464-8295. And those people who are listening up in the great state of Oregon or there in northern Idaho, we certainly welcome hearing from you as well. But right now we have with us on the line one of my very, very favorite guests, Berit Kjos. And we're going to be talking about Lost Atlantis. Now, of course, this has been recently brought forward in a Disney film, cartoon film, and with the idea that this wonderful, wonderful story about a little boy who has found the key to discovering where Lost Atlantis was. But we really have to understand the true history of Atlantis, not from the point of view of the movie. You can't understand the movie unless you understand that this is what the occultists, those people who worship the prince of this world, have always sought to restore Lost Atlantis. Berit, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Stan. It's great to be back with you.
Why don't you tell our listeners what is the significance of Lost Atlantis, where did the idea come from, and why should we, the average individual, be concerned just about a movie? After all, it's just a movie.
Well, the idea first came from Plato, but I'm sure he wasn't the initiator of it. But he's the first who wrote about Atlantis and built an interesting myth that has been picked up at various times throughout history. Every time people want to bring out a good illustration of a occult society with a wonderful peace and unity as a model for the particular society, they can bring out Atlantis, and that's what occultists have done since the beginning of history. For example, if just picking it up in 1888, Madame Blavatsky, who is called the founder of the New Age movement, was writing her book, The Secret Doctrine, which set out the whole philosophy of theosophy and the channeling of the ascended, sort of an occult hierarchy, the opposite, the demonic side that's described very briefly in Ephesians chapter 6, where we see spiritual hierarchies and rulers and the whole army of Satan's demons who are arrayed against people. These are good people, good beings.
According to Madame Blavatsky, that is.
So by Madame Blavatsky, yes. So Isaiah 5:20 says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil." God calls them evil. He said, this is the real battlefield in Ephesians 6 when he shows us how to put on the armor of God. And Madame Blavatsky and the channeled information from the various ascended masters that she talks about shows the other side. Here they're exalting these demonic hierarchies, the generals, the masters, the rulers, and so on.
Well, I think, Berit, one of the hardest things for most people to correlate is the fact that history, you can't understand history really unless you understand the spiritual side of it. In other words, we know what goes on, we study history, but we don't study history from a spiritual point of view. We study it from this happened and that happened and the next thing happened. But, to really understand what Atlantis is all about, you have to go back to the time of Plato. And you have to really even go before that, you have to go to Pythagoras. And, of course, everybody who's ever gone to school, studied geometry, remembers the Pythagorean dictum, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. But did anybody ever wonder where Pythagoras got that? Did he just sit down one time and said, the square of the two sides of a right-angled triangle equal to the hypotenuse? No, he had actually gone to the Near East and he'd studied the mysteries with the sages of the mystery religions. He'd returned to Greece, and at that time southern Italy was part of the Greek Empire, and so he set up a school where they studied the mysteries, and he taught the mysteries, that this secret knowledge that had been passed down through the ages. And then, of course, 2 generations later along comes Socrates, and then his student Plato, who was involved with the mysteries and with occultism. And then you have Aristotle, and then you have Alexander the Great, who set out to rule the world, just exactly what they're trying to do today. And of course, we have a book written by Scott Kyle, Plutarch's The Life of Alexander, where Alexander has been schooled in the mysteries, the secrets. And, of course, he writes a letter to Aristotle saying, "You schooled me in the mysteries, and now you're teaching them to everybody else. You're going to take away my ability. I have something that other people don't have because I understand the mysteries, and now you've written a book about them." And Aristotle wrote back and said, "Oh, no, you have nothing to worry because nobody can understand the mysteries unless they've been individually schooled in them." So here you see the man who, for all intents and purposes, conquered the whole known world there hundreds of years before Christ was born, and yet he was involved in the mysteries. And you can't understand what's going on today unless you see the occult forces and the part they play out. And here's Plato writing about Atlantis, 23, 50, somewhere in there. And now, today, why they're having movies about this, with the idea that won't Lost Atlantis be wonderful?
That's exactly what these people have been saying, and it's fascinating to hear you give the ancient history, Dr. Stan. Again, it just reminds me of what the great book, Brotherhood of Darkness, is, because it really sets out that agenda, that demonic agenda, the Luciferian plan, and the people who have been involved in it in more recent times.
Right.
But it's a very interesting puzzle to look at, because so often in our discussion of history and the various activities that have been taking place through the ages, we leave that part out, and I'm so glad that we can talk about it openly and bring in those dark influences that have been always trying to move people away from God, fighting God's plan, and it is such a great reminder that we are blessed to know Him, because there's the only place there's safety from these forces of darkness is in Jesus Christ, and that makes me just very grateful that He's opened my eyes and the eyes of our listeners to know Him.
Why don't you tell us the story as it's put forward in this Disney production? Because I think that there's so many things in this story, about the crystals and all. You go to any metaphysical bookstore today, and everybody's got the crystals on. You talk to the people involved in the New Age, they're all wearing crystals because that's their tie into the secret power.
Well, Milo is a hero, a young man who looks very much like Harry Potter. The pictures of Harry Potter is a skinny, dark-haired young man with glasses. And he works at the museum in Washington, D.C., a half century ago, supposedly, in this particular story. And he has a real knack for languages, and he's able to decode various information that tells him where to spot Atlantis on the map. And he tries to put together a team, but his employees at the museum just laugh at him and mock him and think this is just foolishness. It turns out that his grandfather, his deceased grandfather, who had shared the vision of Atlantis with Milo, his grandson, had a good friend who is still living. He loves to do yoga, sits in yoga positions, and a rather eccentric old man. And he puts together a team that Milo can accompany and guide in order to find the lost city. And so they take off, and they have faced various obstacles on the way. and it's very noisy and rather violent at spots, but they get to Atlantis. They come into this beautiful place, but of course it's not the glorious old Atlantis, because that has much of that isn't visible at this point. But you see some of the old empire, and he meets Princess Kida, who wears a crystal around her neck. When she sees him, she's very surprised to see humans entering into this lost territory, so she scratches him on the chest to see if he's actually a flesh and blood human being, and of course he bleeds, so she pulls out the crystal and she heals him. She touches the wound with the crystal, and it immediately disappears. Then they have an opportunity to try out the same crystal on one of the flying vehicles in Atlantis, and this is fits the old description from Plato. They had this high-tech society where they had made flying vehicles that were energized by these amazing powers. And it turns out that there's a power source, a universal power source in a way, and every person wears their crystal in order to connect with that power source. And this source can feel the collective emotions of the people. This is very important in the realm of the New Age, because feelings have a lot to do, and especially collective feelings, in somehow speeding up the evolution of various societies. You see this in a lot of New Age books, contemporary popular New Age books. And this evolving force is unlike what we have been, usually think of in physics as a power or power source staying fairly constant, that the energy here is evolving and developing a consciousness of its own. So it becomes more like a god. In fact, there's more than this one deity, this powerful source that everybody draws energy and inspiration and so on through, because we're told that the gods were unhappy with the Atlanteans, and this is why they were destroyed. They had become increasingly materialistic. They began to lose their ability to walk in the consciousness of this particular evolving force, and as they lost that peace and unity that they originally had demonstrated, the gods then allowed the whole continent to be destroyed.
Now, of course, this is the basic occult belief. This is the sort of story that Plato wrote about, and basically he even talked about these flying vehicles that they had, didn't he?
Yes, he sure did.
And can you imagine, here we are 3,500 years, or 350 years before Christ is born in Bethlehem, Plato is writing about these flying vehicles. And, of course, this great knowledge that Atlantis had. Now, whether this was the world as it was at the time of Noah, or whether this is entirely myth, we have no ways of knowing. But of course, the occultists have always wanted to reconstitute lost Atlantis. And those of you who have read my book, Brotherhood of Darkness, we simply quote from the occult writings of Manly P. Hall, his writings in the Secret Destiny of America, or his writing, the Secret Teachings of the Ages, and he will simply tell you that it was the desire of every occultist down through the centuries, down through the millennia, to reconstitute lost Atlantis. And so it was that when America was first created, it was first being settled back in the early 1600s, shortly after the Pilgrims arrived here in the United States, why Rosicrucians, part of a secret society, came from England to America to fulfill the dream that had been laid out in a book written by Francis Bacon entitled The New Atlantis. America was to be the new Atlantis, to lead the world into this one world government with this new world religion. And you, as you've analyzed this through the centuries, you've seen this recurrent theme, haven't you? Many people have talked about lost Atlantis. Who are some of them?
Well, the more familiar ones, I won't go into all the others. Rudolf Steiner, founder of Waldorf schools, and he was a follower of Madame Blavatsky. He was a theosophist, as she was, because he embraced her teachings at first, but then he sort of wandered a little beyond theosophy and developed his own spirituality called anthroposophy. And he talks about his writings include descriptions of Atlantis, but it's just interesting to keep in mind that the Waldorf schools in many parts of the country have been incorporated into public schools. In fact, 2 magnet schools that our Waldorf schools were accepted as public schools back in Milwaukee several years ago. So this teaching, this incredible occult teaching is filtering into public schools, whereas the doors are closing to biblical truth. Edgar Casey is fairly well known probably to many of our listeners, and he described the Atlantis, or the judgment on Atlantis, as those disturbing forces that brought the first destruction of the continent. And he again popularized this particular myth in the 1930s and 40s.
Now, for our listeners out there, Edgar Casey was a sleeping prophet. He was just an average man who would sort of go into a trance, and he could actually cure people of their diseases. They would write to him, and he would come up with a treatment that would cure them. This man truly had supernatural power, but it didn't come from God.
Right, and his statistics for success were enough to impress many people, because as our media does today, they would remind people of all the successes he had, where somehow his diagnosis from a distance was correct, but they didn't talk about all the failures. Now he attributed the disappearance of Atlantis to the self-indulgence of the materialistic people in Atlantis. And it's interesting, the words that he used were almost the same as what I heard the Dalai Lama say when he was speaking at the shoreline, at the big, amphitheater at Shoreline, where they have a lot of rock concerts. The Dalai Lama had come to speak. It was totally filled. I was sitting in the back, and he gave the same message over and over again. And he even talked about some of these same ascended masters that provide messages and insights for today that we can read about in Madame Blavatsky's writings and in Alice Bailey's writings, because she talks about about Atlantis also a number of times in her various books that were channeled by the spirit guide, or from the spirit guide, Jewel Kuhl, the Tibetan master. So it's not surprising that somehow theosophy fits in with Tibetan Buddhism, because they both look back to the same occult sources and ascended masters that transmit the secret information.
And the source of their great supernatural power. And ladies and gentlemen, it is there. And the last thing you ever want to do is to try to tap into that. But of course, there was sort of a sequence. There was Madame Blavatsky, who formed the Theosophical Society, and then Annie Besant, a Fabian socialist who came to lead it, and then Alice Bailey. And of course, this is the foundation of the modern New Age movement. But Alice Bailey's disciples now are working towards the world government. Robert Mueller, for 30 years in the United Nations, almost 20 years as Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, is one of these Luciferians, one of these followers of his Lucifer. In fact, the whole background behind the United Nations is a move towards a world government, a one-world Luciferian government. And of course, this will be the leader. And the fact that our churches are telling the people this, that the Christians of America are sitting back, doing nothing, idly having good times and doing all the things that people do. And yet, of course, instead of engaging in this spiritual battle, the defense of the faith really reflects very, very poorly and tragically on what's going on today. So, but there have been others besides certainly Alice Bailey and Rudolf Steiner and Edgar Casey have written about it. What did this Shirley MacLaine say about Walt Disney? Didn't she write about Disney and the influence that he would have in our society?
Right. She said, and this is reading from The Light Shall Set You Free, a book that she co-authored. And by the way, Shirley MacLaine was the senior director of Mid-Continent Regional Laboratory in Kansas. This is one of the many educational laboratories where psychosocial educators put together various strategies used to manipulate and control behavior, thinking, and so on, and put all of this material into curriculum, both for teacher education and for classrooms. And so she was very involved in this kind of manipulation to change the values, the beliefs and values of America. So she co-authored a book which is primarily channeled messages from various spirit guides again. I think there's, if I remember right, there's one from Jawal Kul, but there are many more from a different spirit guide called Kasumi.
And these are really demons, aren't they?
They're all demons.
Right.
Demonic messages that sound really good to a lot of people. And of course are exactly the opposite of what God would tell us. Or sound godly but have a totally different conclusion. One of the quotes from that book is, quote, "All humans shall have natural ability to perceive dimensions higher than the third. In Atlantis, human embodiment accepted this mode of operation and perception as normal. The Atlanteans operated on the superior level of existence connected to their higher selves. With the fall of Atlantis, humanity experienced a struggle for survival and became aware of the lower self, dominated by the will of the ego." Here's the same message that we heard from Edgar Cayce and from the Dalai Lama and various others who attributed to people all of a sudden becoming materialistic rather than demonstrating solidarity. Then she talks about Walt Disney, and she says he is a newly ascended master who is well known as a cartoonist, illustrator, movie maker, and futurist. His mission on Earth was to create an awareness of the elementals and animals and to integrate the existence of these kingdoms into human consciousness. Now, since we're looking at messages that are given by demons, there doesn't need to be a lot of truth to it. I mean, they can make up anything they want to because they're not held accountable to telling the truth.
You mean you can't very well sue a demon for a libel or for...
Right. You can't do that. But it's very interesting that they are giving credit to Walt Disney and honoring him in this particular way. And I went to one of the Disney websites. It's called laughingplace.com, and it talks about youth leaders gathering at the Disney Institute for a day of peace. Again, the vision of Atlantis is total unity, everybody connected to the same force, sharing the same consciousness, thinking alike, nobody, no conflicts. It's really the whole vision of what the United Nations and the peace, the federation of the world from that poem that you quote so often, Dr. Stan.
No, you mean let's see, what is the Federation of Man, the Parliament of Man, the Federation of the World? Yes, James Russell Lowell.
Right. It's that same vision, and so here we have the Disney Institute working together with the United States Institute of Peace, which was created by Congress in 1984 to teach young people to appreciate peace and to fight for peace. In other words, indoctrinated with this vision of the perfect collective society.
And of course, maybe this might explain why they have gay days at the Disneyland and why really some religious groups are boycotting Disney, because they see the occult underpinnings, and really so many of their cartoons deal with the occult. The Lion King, which you wrote up a beautiful treatise on that. So, I mean, when you point it out, it's so obvious, the occult message there. To the average individual, it's just a movie. But to those from the dark side, they understand, and of course, their objective is not people like you and I, old folks. Their objective is to gain control of the mind of the youth, for these are the people they're recruiting for the brave new world that is to come.
Let me just read something from a different piece of paper from the same website. And this particular page is titled Humanities and Life Management, Disney's Leadership, the Inside Track. And here they have high school students, grades 11 and 12, coming together for a class experience in again, in the Disney way of thinking, here is the vision. Key learning highlights. Vision. Point 1. Students are introduced to the visionary known as Walt Disney. 2. Students are presented with the concept that through words and actions, every leader is telling a story about what they value. So here's an admission that truly what is presented in a Disney movie is designed to communicate the values of the creator.
Yes, but what creator?
I mean, the creator of the movie. And it's interesting how many people in Hollywood will deny the influence of the violence that they present in movies, or the occultism.
And yet so many people in Hollywood are into the Kabbalah or other occult studies.
Absolutely. Right? Kabbalah has become one of the most popular religions.
Well, for our average listener out there who doesn't know what the Kabbalah is, could you basically just briefly summarize that? Because, of course, this is one of the founding documents of every occultist today.
Well, when you read the history of it, it's Jewish mysticism with a whole set of extra biblical myths.
But of course, it really came out of the mystery religions in ancient Babylon, and it was just sort of tabulated by some of the Jewish scholars who were there in captivity.
Right. And it involved a lot of dark matter. It was very similar to various other secret societies with the various occult symbols, lots of different triangles put together, hexagrams, pentagrams, and so on. All the different signs and symbols that became popular in various occult societies.
And these really go back to the mystery religions that existed even before ancient Babylon. And there's always been the mystery religions, going right back to the advent of mankind. In fact, I believe it was the influence of the mysteries at the time of Noah that caused God to destroy the world. Certainly it was very, very evil at that time. But since the advent of the dawn of civilization, there has always been the secret knowledge. Those people, of course, who were disciples of the prince of this world, offered wonderful opportunities. Just follow us and you will have great wealth and power. But of course, at what cost?
Now, when I heard a Kabbalist speak about Kabbalah and give a class on this topic at the Gorbachev 1997 State of the World Forum, Gorbachev's forum in San Francisco, they had totally reinterpreted. It sounded much more like the Celestine, prophecy. It was pantheistic. We're all going to be joined together. In fact, it sounded like the myth of Atlantis as presented in this particular movie.
Then what people must understand...
They took out the dark occult magic and they reinterpreted and packaged it in just, we're all going to be one. We're going to tap into these wonderful forces. There is a pantheistic force throughout the world, and if only we all grow in consciousness and unify, we can have a perfect, peaceful society.
And here's Gorbachev. Now, what's Gorbachev doing associated with the occult? Well, he is deeply involved in the occult. You must understand that James H. Billington, who was the Librarian of Congress, wrote a book in 1991. Anybody wants a copy of the pages, we'll be glad to give them, send them to you. He talks about having been in a car with a high member of the former communist regime who told James H. Billington, the Librarian of Congress, that Russia wasn't doing so badly until Gorbachev was actually introduced into a Masonic lodge by Margaret Thatcher. And after that, of course, Russia began to implode. Now, is that true? All I know is what James H. Billington says, but don't you find when you have been to these meetings that there is a strong occult background in this whole move towards world government, and specifically in the meetings that Gorbachev puts on?
Oh, absolutely. And Robert Mueller would come each year. Because he would come to other UN conferences too, and I've had many opportunities to talk with him, ask him a few questions, especially when he has said something really outlandish, like when he was speaking at the celebration of the Spirit at the 50th anniversary for the United Nations.
That was a former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations.
Exactly. And he prepared a World Core curriculum based on the teachings of Alice Bailey, and talked at that particular meeting on how we needed to control all the people and make sure, assess how they use the resources of the earth and punish anybody, set up a whole new criminal code for violence against nature.
I think they call that the International Criminal Court, which, of course, Bill Clinton signed into law. We got 3 minutes, Barrett, if you'd like to get a cup of coffee or a drink of water. Why? And then we'll be right back when we're going to welcome calls from out across America at 1-888-24-LIBERTY or here on the Central Coast at 464-8295. Well, and this is the time when we have to remind you that Radio Liberty is listener-supported. We're dependent upon you and the listening audience to help us do what we do 5 hours a day, bringing the truth out across America that you're not going to get from Barbara Walters or Dan Rather or Tom Brokaw or ABC or CBS or NBC. We're trying to educate the people about the true nature of the spiritual battle in which we're engaged. So if you believe that we have an important message, you'd like to be part of our team. Maybe you out there and you say, I know something's wrong, but I don't know what it is, or what can I do? I'm just one person. Well, I'm just one person too, but for one reason or another, why things have fallen into place. I'm a retired orthopedic surgeon. I now do, as I said, 5 hours of talk radio a day, and our programs are heard across America, across the world by the miracle of shortwave and the internet, and well, quite frankly, with your help, why we can expand even further. We're really in a race against time, from our point of view, to educate the people as rapidly as we can. Of course, in the final analysis, I recognize it's God's battle, and I'm certainly simply here to do my best, as each one of you out there are. And my job is to educate you as to what's going on, with the hope that you can educate others, and we can awaken the church, the good people of America. We're still the majority. Most people don't want to go into this Luciferian one-world government, but there are people out there who want to take us into that. And so if you'd like to join the Radio Liberty family of supporters, give us a call at 1-800-544-8927. That's 1-800-544-8927. That's 1-800-5-HIV-WAR. And of course, you can tell others about our programs. You can tell others about our internet site, radioliberty.com. And certainly we invite you to call our programs here while we're on the air. If you want to get further information, we'll be glad to send you a copy of our latest newsletter. You can ask for the July newsletter. Now, I'll have to tell you it's the third in a series of newsletters. The rest of them are up on our internet site. But they will explain to you the Skull and Bones Society, from which George W. Bush comes from, how it relates to the Rhodes Scholarships and the Fabian Socialists and the Council on Foreign Relations, and these other organizations so dedicated to the establishment of a one-world government. So, quite frankly, we hope that you'll want to join the Radio Liberty family and want to help us. And, of course, again, our telephone number to call, 1-800-5-HIV-WAR, because we are at war. America is under siege today. Well, Dr. Stan back here at Radio Liberty. Our guest this evening is Berit Kjos, and her website is Crossroad. Is it Crossroads? No, crossroad.to.
Right, no S.
No S. Crossroad.to. And you want to go to that website because Berit is one of the most prolific and fascinating writers, and you'll find everything she has written there. It's well verified, and the reference, you'll find the documents from which she has the material. And Berit is one of my favorite guests, and the material you'll find at her website is unparalleled any place. Now, she's a writer, and I'm a talker. That's the difference between the two of us. But she has the information that you'll need to get, and on so many things, whether it's the various Olympic spectacles they put on. I don't know how many of you have watched the Olympics, and the occult underpinnings of everything that goes on there. This is occultism. Why? The joining together of the whole entire world. You even see this in some of the Super Bowl festivals, cult rituals, worshiping, certainly the pantheistic concepts, the dark forces. But most people don't recognize it. They think it's just entertainment. It's really not. It is simply demonstrates the influence of the dark side within our society today. Now, Berit's written a number of books, The Brave New Schools, Twist of Faith, under the spell of Mother Earth. If you want to know anything about how to get those, our telephone number here, 1-800-544-8927, and they'll tell you what the suggested donation would be. We've got King calling us from, is that New Orleans, Louisiana?
Yeah.
Good to have you with us, King.
How you doing, Dr. Fan?
Doing just fine, thanks.
I have two short questions for you all. One, did you all see the latest news about Iraq sneaking into Jordan, amassing a lot of elite guards in a desert in Jordan, making way for preparations to attack Israel?
No, I haven't heard about that. Have you, Barrett?
No, I haven't.
No, when did that come out?
That came out at WorldNet Daily
All right, well,
this afternoon.
Joseph Hare is a personal friend of mine, and he usually checks things pretty carefully, so I would put a good deal of credence in it. What else do you have?
My other question is, I'm a biblical scholar, basically, and I haven't heard anyone talk about this, and I just wanted to see if you all ran across it. From my studies, it appears to me that Jerusalem is going to be Mystery Babylon, the city, and I've read some things where they've talked about Jerusalem being the capital of the one world government, and the scriptures talk about where our Lord was crucified and things like that in Revelation, and it also talks about how all the blood of the saints is on Jerusalem, and at the same time it makes the same reference to Mystery Babylon. So there seems to be a lot of references there that is going to be Jerusalem. Any comment?
Do you have any comment on that, Barrett?
I hesitate to make that connection. I think we can make some arguments for it, but you hear so many arguments that sound plausible, but we don't know if that's exactly what God has in mind.
No,
so I tend to have some reservations. The thing that ties everything together is that there's been always a real consistency in the pattern of God's judgment of sin. And people, since human nature has always been basically the same around the world, communities move in the same direction when they drift away from God. In fact, you can follow the pattern in the first chapter of Romans of what happens when they move away from God. They're caught up in lusts and then in passions, and it differentiates between those two, sexual activity, but all kinds of lusts. And then they move on to a depraved mind where they no longer have a standard, and so they just follow their own nature and the temptations that Satan puts before them. And so in the Old Testament, we saw the cycles of judgment when people lived in peace and prosperity. After a while, they thought they didn't give God credit anymore. They didn't sense their need, and so they trusted themselves. We saw, in other words, they demonstrated what we would call humanism. Man is the ultimate, and we can do anything. And then it didn't take long after that the people would find out that they couldn't do anything, and they needed some kind of power, and because they had already become addicted to lifestyles that clashed with what God had taught, they usually would turn first to occult forces, paganism, witchcraft, sorcery, those secret societies for power, and then of course God would withdraw his protection and the nations would be destroyed. And so we see this pattern over and over again. So a lot of the parallels between different civilizations or even the cities may have more to do with a repetitive pattern of how God deals with total disobedience and decadence.
Oh, okay.
Okay, now,
does that make sense?
Yeah.
I will tell you, I'm not a Bible scholar. I don't purport to be. I know a lot more about history and certainly about the spiritual forces that are out there. But if you'd like perhaps a more learned response, you might call on Wednesday evening at 9 o'clock when we have Pastor Doug on. But I think that my guess is, and it's only a guess, that the Babylon that's described, and I think it's in Revelation 18, may very well be the society we live in today, which is the society where all the merchants of the world, of course, trade with it. Now, certainly Jerusalem is pivotal to everything going on in the world today, and we certainly know that, at least according to prophecy, the temple will be rebuilt, and of course the world ruler will be there, and then he will eventually, of course, he will conceal who he really is for some years, and then he will announce, of course, that he is God and everyone will worship him. But I can't tell you more than that. Why don't you call next Wednesday evening at 9 o'clock and ask Doug that, okay?
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
And our telephone number, 464-8295 or 1-888-24-LIBERTY. That's 464-8295 or 1-888-24-LIBERTY. If you have any question you'd like to ask dealing with the subject tonight, we can discuss our subject tonight better than some of the biblical questions, which I think philosophers have certainly questioned down through the ages. But I think the significant thing is that we are involved in a spiritual battle that is being fought on the political battlefield, and this is what's not really well recognized by most people that we are seeing unfolding today. This spiritual battle, and the church, of course, is silent, it's not speaking out, and the God's people have been neutralized.
Or they're blending in with it.
Right.
We're seeing an incredible movement towards synthesis in every area of life, and so the churches, because people are tending to be more and more illiterate, we're so busy watching television and following all kinds of other distractions that we don't have time to memorize scripture anymore, and we don't have a filter for what is really true and what isn't, and so we go with what feels good.
So much of the modern day church is, we want you to be happy. And boy, if you become a Christian, you're going to be a happy camper. In fact, Christianity is just fun. Well, that doesn't mean Christians can't have fun, and Christians can't enjoy life. But Christianity is not necessarily an easy life. And what happens if our society falls? What happens if this wonderful utopian existence we live with today were to be taken away from us? Would we still be true to our faith if Christianity is simply based upon having a good time and fun? And of course, I saw what had happened in Germany after the Second World War. And the Christians of Germany in the 30s were assured that they didn't have to be involved because God was in control. And of course, many of them believed that Adolf Hitler was the Antichrist and they were going to be whisked away in the coming rapture. And of course, when it didn't happen, when everything was destroyed, and I was there, I saw the cities laying in rubble and the churches standing empty because the people knew that they'd been lied to and Christianity was a lie. Well, Christianity is true. It was simply the form of Christianity that was taught in Germany at that time, and tragically, I feel, has been so widely taught in America today by all branches of the church. Is not true. What would you say to that?
Oh, I totally agree. And one of my favorite books years ago was Bonhoeffer's book on the cost of discipleship, where he talks about suffering. The fact that, in Philippians chapter 1:29, it says that we've been called not just to believe on Christ, but also to suffer with him. And we see so many different passages in Scripture that talk about what it means to suffer with him. And I was just listening to a tape a couple of days ago which told about a man who was it wasn't Richard Wurmbrandt, whom I just have learned so much through his books, but somebody else who was in prison, and the communist guard came in and started beating him, and he cried out. And then next day, and he prayed for that guard right afterwards. He was being tortured, and he prayed for him when it finished. And the next day, the same guard came in, or commander. He was a high person, and he told everybody else to go, and he didn't. God had done something in his heart, and the man who was being described, I think his name was Tang. He said, "I apologize for crying out yesterday as I shouldn't have. I've been praying for you, and it's my joy to suffer with Jesus. When he was crucified for me, why should I, cry out and be angry because I am called to suffer for him in a little bit?" Anyway, it was just a very beautiful story. I can't retell it very well, but it turned the communist guard around. His heart was really touched, and he started weeping. It's so often through those times of real pain and hurt, of course, that people come to know God's love. So it was just an exciting demonstration of what the Christian life is like and what it might be when these forces that we're talking about, that we see in Atlantis, and we saw them through Edgar Casey, and through Madame Blavatsky and Alice Bailey and Shirley MacLaine, when these forces have more and more take over our society as they're doing right now, then we're going to be facing persecution. Jesus said, if they persecute me, they will persecute you, and we had better be ready for it. May I just read one more quote from Shirley MacLaine?
You can read all you want to. You see, there's nobody here telling us what we can do.
I know. I just know that there's so much to be shared. But she said, when she was speaking at the Governor's Conference in 1989, which was led by Bill Clinton, first Governor's Conference on Education, and she said, what is happening in America is total transformation of our society. We have moved into a new era. I'm not really sure we have begun to comprehend the incredible amount of human resource development that's needed. She also said at the same conference that the revolution in curriculum is that we're no longer teaching facts to children. It's important that children no longer get a factual foundation for thinking and for seeing reality. Because if they don't stand firm, don't learn to have convictions, then they can be their minds can be manipulated. And of course, Shirley MacLaine, as you mentioned earlier, headed up the Mid-Continent Regional Education Laboratory, and all these psychosocial strategies passed through her hands that had been used in the Soviet Union, passed through her hands, and went out to schools everywhere. In her book, as I mentioned earlier, she quoted various spirit guides, and she talks about the earth will be cleansed in the next decade, for the purification must be complete. That sounds like Barbara Marx Hubbard, doesn't it, Dr. Stan?
It sure does. And of course, what the people don't understand is these people are frankly occultists. They're working within our educational system. They're working within our government. They're working within our military. They're working within our corporate structure. They're certainly dominating our media. And then we wonder, and they're even working within our churches. But of course, they pretend to be preaching the word of God, and they're really preaching the word of the evil one.
Right. Another person that we might just mention, she's not as familiar, but Corinne McLaughlin, who wrote Spiritual Politics with Gordon Davidson. And the foreword for their book is written by Dalai Lama. But she, too, talks about Atlantis. And I saw her at one of the UN conferences, had a chance to talk with her. She had told about her friendship with Hillary Clinton, for example. I even asked her if Hillary Clinton would be, I don't imagine Hillary Clinton would like you to make your friendship public. And she kind of laughed and said, no, that she wouldn't. I mean,
well, I think, Hillary Clinton invited Gene Houston, who was an occultist into witchcraft and theosophy, to the White House to conjure up the spirit of Eleanor Roosevelt and Mohandas Gandhi. Everybody laughed at that. No, this wasn't funny. This represents the occult influence there. I have a very good friend of mine who's an investigative reporter who has all the material. She was going to write an article on the coven meetings, witches' coven meetings held in the White House when Hillary was there. And my friend was told, if you write that article, you'll be killed. And so she did not write that article. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we're up against today. And where is the outcry from our leaders? Why is nobody telling us about these occult forces that are there? I mean, the whole environmental movement behind all of this is the worship of Mother Earth, of Gaia, being taught in our schools today. We couldn't mention the name of Jesus Christ, but we can mention Mother Earth and Gaia in our schools. We celebrate Earth Day. Schools all across America. Do you know what day that is? It's April 22nd. Do you know who was born that day? Lenin, of course. And because the average individual doesn't know that. Every communist does, every occultist does, because Lenin himself was involved with the occult.
But since you brought up the Earth Day and the environmental movement, let me just mention that Corinne McLaughlin, who channels the same spiritual guides, masters, that Alice Bailey does, was the first task force coordinator for President Clinton's Council on Sustainable Development.
Oh, doesn't that make me feel good?
And she also taught these strategies at the Department of Education, at the EPA, and at the Pentagon.
And we wonder why our kids can't read, why our kids know far more about sex than they do about Shakespeare.
Because this fits the agenda. I mean, Aldous Huxley said it well in Brave New World, where he talked about, I don't have the quote in front of me, but he said that a dictator will do well to encourage sexual promiscuity because it will help his subject become used to the servitude, which is their fate.
Right.
And so anything that will draw them away from God, take them off the factual foundations, and guide them into the consensus process where we learn that relationships, horizontal relationships, are far more important than fact and truth or obedience. The key is please everyone else. See yourself as a member of the collective. It's communism all over again.
It's the destruction of the individual and, of course, the replacement by the, as you say, by the collective.
Right.
Our telephone number, 1-888-24-LIBERTY or 464-8295. That's 1-888-24-LIBERTY or 464-8295. Our guest this evening is Berit Kjos. Her website, and I recommend it to you, is Crossroad. That's crossroad.to. You want to go there, and of course you want to pull down their various articles on so very many different things that will give you tremendous insight into everything that's going on in our society today. So now, we started out talking about Atlantis, and of course this is the movie, it's very popular. Our kids are going, they're learning about this wonderful utopian area, and of course they think this is just a myth, but this is the very foundation of what's going on today. Because of course the occultists hope that we will have America become the new Atlantis that will lead the world into the new one world order. And of course that's what it's all about. America is to use its financial and military power to force all nations to accept our direction. And we saw this recently. We saw this recently over in Yugoslavia, where the government there didn't want to give up Milosevic, but with the offer of $1 billion, they simply turned him over. I don't like Milosevic. I think he's a dirty communist. But of course, he, by his own admission, was working very closely with people from the United States and Great Britain. If you didn't read that in most of your newspapers, but that'll be included, his quotations, how he was simply following out the direction of the people who were advising him, of the leaders of the two Anglo-Saxon nations that really rule the world today, the United States and Great Britain. Our financial and military power are being used to simply enforce our will on all the nations of the world as we move towards the New World Order and the New World Spirituality.
It's an interesting time. Dr. Stan, I just am so grateful for the amount of knowledge that you have and for the opportunity we have to share this with people all over, because as you said before, the media doesn't bring it out. I have a new article on our website that I don't think we have discussed, but it's on the mainstream media. Our listeners might be interested in just reading that article just to see again the United Nations agenda for the mainstream media in every nation, because they need, just as in every totalitarian country, to control media to a certain extent, and they're doing it in various ways, and you describe some of those ways in your wonderful book, Dr. Stam. But all the more important it is that we have sources such as your radio programs to become informed so that we can stand against the pressures. Because people across the country, I get heartbreaking letters, Dr. Stan, from people who will not be heard in their churches, in their families. The children reject the truth that they know. Very few people are listening. If they don't, if they cannot hear the message, they're going to believe the lies.
Amen to that. And that's why everybody out there listening, and we do have a fairly large audience, you have to tell others. If you're listening on the Internet, tell others about our Internet programs. If you want a free bumper sticker that says, "Why are we losing our freedom?" listen to www.radioliberty.com. Give us a call. We'll send you a free bumper sticker. If you want more, maybe you could help us with a donation to pay for them. That number is 1-800-544-8927. If you're listening up in the state of Washington or here on the Central Coast, tell others about our program. And, of course, if you have people in other parts of the country, find out where our programs are heard. We have the information. You have to help us get it out. Tape our programs and certainly tell others about Berit's wonderful website where so much of this information is covered. And Berit, I'll certainly look forward to doing a program with you on the media, because, of course, the media is controlled. Do you touch at all on the CIA influence in the media here?
I'm sorry,
the Central Intelligence Agency, of course, has, at least according to Carl Bernstein, about 400 of its agents working in the media, controlling what the American people think.
Right. No, we're so used to trusting each other. I think this is part of the beautiful heritage of America, is that we were a kind, thoughtful, generous nation. And I know there are many exceptions we can point out, but at least America became the place in the world where people could go for peace and freedom, more than anywhere else. And it's hard for us to think that everything could change almost overnight. Now, since I grew up in Norway, I was too small to realize, to understand, or to in any way remember that all of a sudden Norway overnight lost its freedom. But it can happen anywhere. And God, our God who reigns, is not going to allow this nation to be mocking him a lot longer and maintain the prosperity that we've had.
Well, God has blessed this country greatly, and of course the people have become callous and indifferent, and they've accepted the new gospel and the new music. And of course neither one of these honor God. And
in the middle of all of this, we have his strength and his peace and his promises. And I just wanted to, just share two scriptures, because I think it's just so important we keep coming back to him, because otherwise it's so hard to hear the things we're sharing. I love the whole battle by Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles 20. And in verse 15, he turns to God and he says, "Fear not and be not dismayed at this." He's saying this to the people. "Fear not and be not dismayed at this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but the Lord's." He says, we have no power to face this great army that's attacking us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. Well, we know a few things we can do. We can share the message, we can pray, we can awaken as many people as possible, and we'll keep on remembering other scriptures, such as Joshua 1:9, "Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." I have a long list of scriptures such as this for every battle we're going to face, because we need to stand on these truths in a time when so many people are rejecting it, and just hold on and look to him and then walk in his triumph. He has promised us. He will lead us.
And I agree with you totally. If you study the occult, you find that they pray to their God because he has power. And the power is very real. But our God is far more powerful. And, of course, our God is the true God. And if we try to reach him, if we pray to him, of course, I'm not saying he's going to prevent terrible things from happening. But whatever happens, he will give us the strength to get through it.
Amen.
Well, God bless you. Thank you so much for being with us this evening, Berit. And I don't know where everybody else is. I know they're out there listening, but I suppose that they didn't want to interrupt the flow of thought. So thank you so much for being with us. Again, Berit Kjos, author of Brave New Schools, Twist of Faith, certainly Under the Spell of Mother Earth, and of course those are the three that are available through Radio Liberty of a suggested donation. And then of course we'll be back again with the people up in the great Northwest tomorrow evening at the same time. And of course we ask you to tell others about our programs, to listen. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Berit.
Thank you, Dr. Stan. I appreciate you so much. God bless you.
And you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, fine. So until tomorrow evening, when we'll be with you once again, Dr. Stan's ask you to pray for America, to pray for our leaders, to pray for our ministers, because they should be leading this, not a retired orthopedic surgeon trying to get people to understand the spiritual battle. And finally, please pray for Radio Liberty, for our provision and our protection.